Welcome to the PDIA in Action event series. My name is Salimah Samji, and I am the Director of Building State Capability at the Harvard Center for International Development. I will be your moderator today. The format of today's session is as follows. I will begin with an overview of this event series, followed by a presentation before we open for a Q&A session. Feel free to put your questions in the chat during the presentation. Matt Andrews and I co-teach MLD 103M at the Kennedy School. It's a field lab class where students learn how to use the PDIA problem-driven iterative adaptation approach by working on real-world problems. They learn by doing. The students work together in teams with an authorizer or client who gives them a problem to work on. This year, we asked the alumni of our Implementing Public Policy Executive Program to nominate problems for our students. Over a 7-week period between January and March, our students worked with their authorizer to better understand the problem and to identify entry points. This event series showcases the learning of our students as well as our executive program alumni. Our topic for today's session is exploring trade between Kenya and Canada. And with us, we have our student team, Bishal Belbase, Mayra Hoyos, John Diing, and Stephanie Shalkoski. Welcome. The students worked with Dr. Imbenzi George, who is the Honorary Consul General of Kenya to Canada and an Implementing Public Policy Program alumni. I'd now like to invite John to get us started. John, over to you.
Thank you, Salimah. Thank you, Dr. Imbenzi, and thank you to colleagues who are attending this session today. Our team is called Canadian Safari. The four of us explored the trade between Canada and Kenya using the PDIA tool. And as mentioned by Salimah, we look at PDIA tool as a unique way of approaching a problem. First and foremost, whatever we see as a problem is assumed as a signal. It's not a problem. And so we are actually bound to construct a problem given a little bit of the data that we have gathered. And after we have constructed it, then we have to break it down into sections that are accessible and critical to solve. And then we identify entry points from those sub-problems. And then we see what to learn. And then, of course, we do iteration so that we solve the problem. Now, what are our signals that we saw that told us there was a problem between Kenya and Canada's trade? And the signals were, first thing that we realized is that we know that Canada has a GDP of 1.7 trillion, while Kenya has $95 billion. These are big trade, these are big volumes. And we expected some sort of trade framework to be in place. So the absence of bilateral trade agreement was the first signal that we thought was actually something was amiss. And so we dug a little bit deeper to see exactly what's going on between the two countries, and we realized the trade volumes were comparably so low compared to what's happening between Kenya and the rest of the world and Canada and the rest of the world. For example, on our screen, you can see we're trying to compare what Kenya imports and exports from Canada comparable to what happens in the US. We're all aware that US has about 21 trillion GDP, comparably higher to the volume of Canada, which is 1.7 trillion. But again, the volumes were indicative that this trade was not efficient. We went further to understand the problem, and we realized whatever trade that was going on between these two countries was very, very basic. We call it non-complex commodities. Non-complex commodities are commodities that are very basic, mostly from agricultural produce and textiles. And that form about 51% of the trade that goes on between the two countries, which is indicative that whatever that's going on is not sophisticated, and the two economies are advanced enough to trade in more complicated or complex commodities. We even went further to try to understand the problem, and we realized that the two airlines that are operating do not have direct flights between the two countries, which means the ideas, things like tourism, perishable good trade were definitely affected, and it means the two countries were either not interested in trading with each other or there was a problem somewhere. And so we actually went down, given these signals, to try to construct the problem based on this understanding. And our problem construction, we try to look at it in a broader term, but of course, very meaningful way. What we first realized that there were the processes involved that were supposed to support the trade between the two countries were limited. The systems were non-functional and actually non-existent. For example, the absence of the framework, that is the bilateral trade agreement, and then now the structures, that is governmental structures on both sides of the government. There were no standing structures that would support the trade. So we constructed our problem as limited trade processes, systems, and support structures to be the ones that affect the development of trade between Canada and Kenya. And then we actually went further, having constructed this problem, we went to actually deconstruct it into pieces that we think would be dealt with in terms of trying to resolve it. And this is where we go to our fishbone diagram. And in our fishbone diagram, in trying to solve the problem, we look at it in 5 thematic areas. The one thematic area that is of high importance first is looking at the policies that are in place. And because those are government driven, then we look at the human resource that is in place. We look at the processes that are supposed to support business. And then we look at the business environment in both countries and information technology, which is actually a support tool. So looking at the policies, we were very much interested to know exactly what are the agreements that are in place, whether they are formal or informal, whether they were comprehensive or non-comprehensive. So we realized there was non-binding document that existed between the two countries that actually bound them, that actually bound them to trade with each other. And there was also, we realized there was a bit of laxity on both sides of the government to engage proactively in trade. And that was key. And then why were these missing? Then we went to the personnel involved. Then we realized at political level, there was no political engagement that was intended to promote trade. We also realized that the experts that were actually assigned to deal with the trade on both countries were actually being taken around. None of them was permanent to focus on key issues that needed to be addressed. And furthermore, in the private sector, there was no investment framework in place with experts to support this process. So all this, we also try to see why were they missing, what is going on outside. Then we look at the environment in both countries in terms of business. So we realize, ideally speaking, there was no proactive framework in terms of exports sector development plan to engage the two countries. There was also gender skewed trade understanding, especially from the Kenyan side, we thought needed to be improved on. And then the regional instability, of course, created a lot of fear from the Canadian side. So they were non-proactive in engaging with Kenya. And of course, corruption, which is a perception that is something systemic, seemed to also inhibit private investors from taking risks to invest in this environment. And of course, ICT, which is supposed to be something that drive trade and promote marketing, is very much lacking in Kenya. It's something we thought that should be worked on. And then the processes involved, which are generally systemic barriers. They are internal in terms of how do you get farmers to produce goods? How are they processed? And even if you process them intended for exports, how are they consolidated? We realized all these processes needed to be looked at. So now to actually identify what are the key critical points, I will welcome my colleague, Dr. Bishal Belbase, to take us to the next phase, identify critical points of entry. Dr. Bishal, you're welcome.
It's me, John, but thank you very much. So how did we learn more about the problem? At first, it looked very complex for us and we knew little about it. So we began, first of all, to read a lot. Our authorizer, Dr. Imbenzi, shared with us many documents and resources to understand better the context of Kenya. How does the government work, to know more about trade, tourism, about the community, to know more about specific and important facts. We also read about Kenyan trade agreements, foreign policy, resources related to the Kenya and Canada relations. And this was very enlightening for us. It helped us to understand more the context and a little bit more about the problem, how we could approach it. But the most important thing that we used to learn more about the problem was talking to people, engaging with them, having interviews, meetings. So we were very fortunate that Dr. Imbenzi connected us with very high-ranking officers in the Kenyan government. For example, we talked with Kennedy Barasa, who is a former Kenyan government official. Through him, we learned more about the basics of the Kenyan and Canadian foreign policy. We also talked to Ambassador Amina Mohammed, who is currently in the Kenyan cabinet. She's a secretary for sports, culture, and heritage, but she has a lot of experience in the area. She shared with us the common interest between Kenya and Canada, as well as the challenges in trade that both nations face, and what can Kenya could do in order to facilitate trade with Canada. We also had a very rich conversation with Ambassador Weru, who is the principal secretary in the State of Department. We mainly learned about the barriers to trade and how Kenya needs to strengthen its institutions to engage better with the international system. And we also learned about soft and hard infrastructure in Kenya. We talked to Dr. Cherry Ans, which was very enlightening because she's not from the government, she's from the nonprofit sector. And talking to her gave us a new perspective about the problems and the ideas that we were proposing to solve it. So she suggested we explore a new industry, which was the digital knowledge industry, as a way to solve the problem. And she also mentioned how perceptions is an important factor that could alter trade between the two countries. Finally, we also talked to Salimah. So she's an academic practitioner of Kenyan origin, and she's a director of the building capacity of public organizations in the Kennedy School. And she gave us a broader perspective of the Kenyan diaspora and on ideas on how to solve the challenge through education, trainings, or think tanks. So all of these documents that we read, interviews that we have with these people, help us really understand the problems and how could we best approach this, and if the ideas that we were thinking and that we were proposing to Dr. Imbenzi were the correct ones. I'll now pass it on to my colleague Bishal.
Yeah, thank you, John and Mayra, for the elaborate descriptions. So then, as you saw in the fishbone diagram, then we started to look for entry points, which ideas that we could, start with. By the way, the city in the picture is Vancouver, where Dr. Imbenzi, our authorizer, is based on. Well, yeah, next slide, please. So from the strands of various causes in the fishbone diagram, we identified 5 entry points that we have listed here. Like one is lack of interest by the both governments. Next, we saw that there was no direct link between Canada and Kenya. Next, we identified that Canadian investors' perception about the Kenyan business was a hindrance as well. Similarly, we realized that there was limited expertise of Kenyan negotiating teams, and also we saw that there was missing political support from both governments. So we took these we identified these points based on we had a limited time span of 7 weeks, and we wanted to see where we could work, and based on our best assumptions of the authority Dr. Imbenzi held, and because of his position and the broader political or legal support he could garner, the acceptance by other stakeholders involved in both Canada and in Kenya, and his personal abilities, skills as a authorizer, or the practical feasibility of doing things, we classified those all those entry points into whether or not, this thing had a good authority, this thing had a good enough acceptance, and whether we had, or the authorizer had the good enough ability to do these things. And based on that, we identified two key ideas where the, change the space, where, the sweet spot between authority, acceptance, and ability was the highest, and where we could achieve, the quickest wins. Next slide, please. So we thought we could start with two ideas. The first was connecting Kenya and Canada. Connecting Kenya and Canada by establishing direct flight between the two countries was one of the low-hanging fruits we could target, and it would be so beneficial because, like, one of the main exports of Kenya was perishable goods like flowers. Is one of the key Kenyan export, and you could imagine if there is no direct flight, what how it might affect its exports. Similarly, travels related to business and tourism would be affected. So we also thought about promoting Kenya as a tourist destination for Canadians. To give a perspective, like only 18,000 Canadians traveled to Kenya in last year, compared to about 12 million Canadian travelers to countries like Italy. Similarly, one of the things that we realized is the connection on people to people level, on a person to person level between Kenya and Canada was also lacking, and we realized that the thriving diaspora of Kenya and Canada could play a big role in making sure that the perception of the perception in Africa and Canada, Africa and Kenya in Canada is improved. Next slide. Also, we thought like one area that we could start working right away was building the capacity and knowledge transfer, building capacity of diplomats. We could train civil servants at Kenyan Foreign Service Academy and prominent business leaders who would probably sit at negotiation tables so that their skills are improved. Our authorizer himself has a lot of expertise and experience in training that, and he could work with Kenyan Foreign Service Academy, and he could also take support from experts in Harvard or other universities in the West as well, so that they can train them on cross-cultural, multinational skills. Similarly, there could be ways where our authorizer could forge partnerships with Kenyan universities like Strathmore College or University of Nairobi, so that international trade and diplomacy trainings are provided to civil servants who would someday be at the negotiating table. Next slide. I would hand over to Mayra again to take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Bishal. So there are still many things that we need to learn and need to know about the problem and the ideas that we are suggesting, but we chose 6 of them to highlight it. So the first one of them is authority to Dr. Imbenzi. We are unsure and we don't know how much personal resources and authority does he need and he's going to receive to face these challenges. We also don't know the Canadian side of affairs, so we were unable to have interviews with Canadian officers in the government or in different sectors. So we think that their perspective on the issue is very important for the challenges and for the ideas that we're suggesting. Also, at the end of this year, there are going to be Kenyan general elections. So there may be some changes with the next administration. We couldn't figure out exactly how we could engage with the large Kenyan diaspora, and we were also unsure of the interest and priority to this issue that the government or the politicians will give. And finally, we still need to learn a lot about the market structure about the technicalities of trade between the two countries. I'll pass it on now finally to Stephanie.
Thanks, Mayra. So the leads that you see here are those that we identified that we feel could help extend the thinking, extend the learning to tackle this challenge, because it's very complex. It's a very complicated and nuanced challenge to investigate. So we found some resources, some probable opportunities to connect with others. Keeping in mind this was only a 7-week process, and especially to get high-ranking government officials, like really busy people who are working in industries, it's hard to engage those individuals in individual interviews as we wanted to. It takes time to kind of progress that. So, we think it would be great engaging the diaspora. There are 2 organizations that we found. Those might be potential possibilities. We know we need to speak to more Kenyan business leaders. We have identified we need to speak to more Canadian business and government leaders, right? Kenyan government leaders, including someone in the office of the Ministry of Tourism, would be incredibly helpful to help progress this work. And finally, the public policy practitioners that Bishal mentioned, perhaps the University of Nairobi, Strathmore. So what did we learn about engaging with our colleagues as part of this PDIA process? And this is our photo from the last day of class. And I think it's nice because all of us are like happy and, feel good about the work that we did together. But it took a little bit to get there, right? And so some lessons that we wanted to kind of talk about and share with you in case it might be helpful for you and in your work. Selecting causes that to work on that aren't too large. I mean, simply put, there are some things that are kind of too big to tackle, right? Like John talked about all the deep things that we could go down that fishbone diagram, right? And Bishal talked about the importance of like picking like low hanging fruit, like where are things that you can take action on. So using that AAA analysis really helps you to kind of hone in. Where do you have authority? Where do you have ability? Where do you have acceptance? Where you can make some small changes and learning fast, right? Iterating towards small solutions. This isn't about getting a big solution out there, right? It's about making little steps. And, we didn't get into the action phase. That's for Dr. Imbenzi and our future, right? But we did see that, we saw that learning fast and iterating, we saw that throughout the processes we were trying to deconstruct the problem, right? And every week, every interview sort of expanded our thinking. So helped us to kind of learn fast. And it was really important that we reflected and checked in together regularly. We had no less than probably 3 meetings a week together as a team. We had a dedicated meeting with Dr. Imbenzi, who was so generous with his time. We had a dedicated interview each week. And then we also had team meetings. So we were able to engage with multiple stakeholders. That's really important, right? Because you don't want to get a narrow look at the problem, but we're fully kind of sharing and saying we wish we could have engaged more people because we know we didn't get a holistic view. So we're acknowledging that, and that's important as part of the process. And so, if we could wave a magic wand and go back and like pre-schedule some of these meetings, it would have been great to really engage more and get some of that feedback on the Canadian side as well. And also, like on the previous slide, you saw all the leads that we identified. And then crawling the design space. This is really a chance, be flexible, be creative, don't accept things at face value, right? Looking for best practices that were used to solve a similar challenge in a different location, looking at what are potential ideas that could emerge with just a little bit of focused attention. So this idea that I think Bishal talked about before with the training, like having that dedicated training to go into negotiation, that helps build a skill set that's really needed, and also that can support that person throughout their career. So that was something that we probably would not have thought about at all if we hadn't been working on this like closely and kind of keep kind of pushing each other. The other thing is, you know, when you're working on PDIA, teaming is a huge part of the process. And I think all of us would say as students, like we're all very different and we had to really come together. Our team constitution really helps. Like, what are the group norms? Like, what are we going to come together around? How do we dig deep? How do we make sure we're pulling together our different perspectives? We disagreed a lot on what is the problem? What's the problem statement? You know, we were looking at the nuances of the language and the words because we know language and words really matter. But I think we're all the better for it, you know, to navigate this process together. So I love this chart, this map. It represents all the different areas where we're looking at, where we're from. We're looking at Kenya and Canada. We have all different nationalities. Some of us were in Boston during this process. Bishal is in Nepal, Dr. Imbenzi is in Vancouver. So we're all over the globe, which is really an incredible opportunity experience at the Kennedy School, right? And so here are our top 3 tips for working with a global student and authorizer team. You know, be mindful of cultural differences. All the research shows that more diverse teams generate more creative approaches to problem analysis, innovative solutions. So take that and use that to your benefit. But also you have to be mindful that everyone, it comes from a different culture, right? And our cultural biases sort of affect the team dynamics. So try to create an opportunity that everyone can contribute in a way that they feel comfortable. I think the other 2 things are a little bit more practical. Use the tech tools, use the communication tools that provide shared access. So what we were navigating is we had really different like sleep, work schedules, school schedules, right? Really different. And so using like Google Docs to collaborate in real time to see changes. Everything we did was on a Google Doc for all of our student work. We had all our meeting notes, our agendas, our resources, interview subjects, everything we were doing. It was super organized in Google Docs. We use WhatsApp. We even got Dr. Imbenzi on WhatsApp with us, which was awesome. So we kept in touch between our meetings and were able to communicate there. And then of course, everyone recognizes the Zoom icon. It is the icon of 2020, 2021 and beyond. But what's so great about Zoom is we were able to interview people across the world, right? But it gives you a little bit more of a connection rather than just hearing the audio. You can see someone. And I think that's really important to building trust and credibility, especially when you're talking to people who are new and that they don't know you and you don't know them. So I hope that helped to put our interview subjects a little bit more at ease. And then I would say, what we did on our team is we put our time zones into our phone apps so we knew like what time it was wherever our teammates were located. And then we have a screenshot from the time zone converter. So you can see like we were really lucky. Dr. Imbenzi is a morning person, so he was able to join us really early, thankfully. And that allowed us to interview our guests who were in Kenya. And also we got Bishal in his early evening and we got us in Boston during the day. So it's may seem like a minor thing, but I think being mindful of small things like that is really important. And the other thing is, I would say our top tip is you need to work with someone who really cares deeply about the challenge and wants to give generously of his time and expertise. We are students, you know, and we want to help Dr. Imbenzi, but we're grateful. He spent a lot of time with us, a lot of time explaining, a lot of time coaching, and also I would say, frankly, being very open to the things that we were sharing and suggesting. And, you know, I think he is a wonderful teacher in that way. So I would say thank you to Dr. Imbenzi from Team Canadian Safari. And that concludes today's presentation, or today's student presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'd now like to invite Dr. Imbenzi to share his perspective of working with our students and what he learned through this experience. Welcome, Dr. Imbenzi.
Thank you. Again, it's exciting to be here this morning, Vancouver time, evening, wherever you guys are, somewhere else around the world. For me, it was a privilege. I've taught international groups where I do a lecture and I've got people from around the world. But this was the first time where I worked with the global community. I had Africa, I had Asia, I had South American, I had Canadian and American on the team. These were diverse perspective. I wasn't just getting an American perspective. I was getting a global perspective of young scholars, really showing me what is possible. When I took PDIA last year, I had this idea that, Kenya needed to establish a trade agreement with Canada. But when I met my team from Harvard, I realized that was the wrong question. That was the wrong direction. They put me onto a whole different thought process. They allowed me to begin to ask the right questions. For example, when we looked at the entry points, which was big for me, one of the things that they brought across was Canadian investors' perception about Kenya business and environments. When I took my PDA, I just wanted a trade agreement to be written. But when they started working with me, they pretty much asked, why should Canadian businesses be interested to invest in Kenya? And then I realized very quickly, that's one of the areas that the Kenyan government had not worked well on. They had done a really poor job in marketing the Kenyan business community. But it's interesting, after we finished our class, one thing I realized very quickly is our cabinet secretary in the Ministry of Treasury had also in the background realized there was a problem. So he came up with a new document on global competitive and prosperous nation. And in it, what he did to do, he looked at all Kenyan business opportunities and he listed, put them all in one directory. And he goes, if Kenya is going to move forward, the global community needs to realize what Kenyan businesses are, what Kenyan business opportunities are. So it confirmed what the young scholars were telling me, that don't think about agreement, think about what can Kenya offer the global community and why should Canadians be interested? So for me, that was a real aha moment where I go, I wish when I was going through my 8 months at PDIA, I would have started at that point because I've been way ahead. How do I feel going forward? I'm excited about what is possible. The connections about, universities of like University of Nairobi, Strathmore University, some of the ideas where the team shared in terms of the connections, the Kenya School of Government or Kenya Foreign Service Institute, the role they'll be able to play to bridge and help educate, first of all, the diplomats that are being put forward to represent Kenya in Canada or around the world. They would have the proper skills to be able to help Kenya negotiate. See, that aspect, I knew it was weak, but they confirmed that area for me so clearly. And I'm really excited about what lies ahead. 2 weeks ago, we had a meeting with the Cabinet Secretary of Treasury. And again, in his alignment, he wanted to share of, Kenyan investment. The colleagues talk about diaspora. He brought the diaspora to the forefront. He goes, we need to use the diaspora to affect change and to let the global community know Kenya is open for business. So again, from Vancouver, I want to say thank you to the team. And lastly, to Kennedy School, Salimah's team. You see, one of the things I believe that is possible and that Kenya really needs, and this was confirmed with our permanent secretary for, a principal secretary for trade, who's also an alumni of Harvard, where if we can get the connection between what Salimah's team does and be able to have them meet our Kenya School of Government, Kenya School Academy, Foreign School Academy, where they can begin to offer resources and best practices. Is it possible for a team from the trade department to take, the same courses I took, the PDIA. See, because then they can bring the skills back home. Is it possible for Harvard to work closely with the Kenya School of Government, where training is offered and Kenyan civil servants can benefit through the skills that are offered? These are those things as I move forward, I want to share with my colleagues in Nairobi, and hopefully in the coming year, we can start implementing some of these processes. So again, Team Canada, I really thank you for all the help. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your wonderful words, Dr. Imbenzi, and to the team. I just want to share, the team has already spoken about, they haven't met each other. They worked virtually. Nobody has been to Kenya, and across so many time zones on a problem that they did not know much about at all, and have been able to make so much progress. And for that, I think it's the hard work, it's the curiosity, it's the attention to, we want to learn, we want to talk to as many people, and getting the different perspectives, which is where emergence of ideas happen, and a better understanding of the problem happens. And for trusting in the process. Dr. Imbenzi was aware of what PDIA was because he had taken our implementing public policy program, but our students were kind of learning, how does this process really work? What does it look like? And by doing and working on this problem, they were able to see how this process actually unfolds, into understanding what is the real problem. Is it, like Dr. Imbenzi said, we need a trade agreement, which is really a solution trying to masquerade as a problem, right? A trade agreement is a solution, not a problem. What is the problem? And having the students kind of keep asking these questions was a really helpful process. So I want to thank all of our students for really trusting in this process and for doing incredible amounts of work in such a short time period of 7 weeks, and to Dr. Imbenzi for spending time at 7 a.m. in the morning every week with our students, and to really, committing to helping them understand and allowing them to have meetings with, people in the cabinet in Kenya. And we could not have done all of those things without your assistance. And I completely agree, there's multiple ways we can work together, and I hope that we can explore some of those in the next few days. IPP, Implementing Public Policy Program, that Dr. Imbenzi took last year, is open, and you can definitely send teams or individuals that you think could benefit from this program. The start date is June 7th, and it will run through to October 22nd this year. And it's fully online because we are not offering any executive education in person, not this year, maybe next year. But with that, I'd like to open the floor for questions. I would like to ask the first question to all our student team, as well as Dr. Imbenzi. What surprised you about this process? And each of you can answer. It can be part of the process, it could be the work, it could be working as a team, it could be any of those things, but what surprised you the most?
Okay, okay, on my side, what surprised me the most is you actually start something that you don't know, and the more you get into it, the tunnel keeps actually going longer and longer and longer. So it makes you more curious, because you discover this, and then you realize there's more that you need to know. And so that in itself, even this problem we are looking at right now, I'm realizing there are other layers that we can actually peel and get further. I think that's what I really got in the process, that it gets it more interesting. Yeah, it challenges you to know more and more.
I would agree with John, and I would add that it's amazing how much your learning can progress by having a relatively short meeting with someone who knows a lot about the subject. We were incredibly lucky because we had Dr. Imbenzi's, influence to get us these important meetings, but we learned so much, and each week was, oh my goodness, now we're looking at something a little bit different than we thought. So I would say knowing, knowing key connections to speak with to help progress your learning is super important part of this process.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Like how much we can learn by, being intentional about learning quickly and learning fast and talking to the right people. If we have the right resources, we definitely can learn a lot about. Like at the end of 7 weeks, I was almost feeling like I was, somebody. I'm from public health, I'm a doctor, but I felt I had a good enough knowledge of, how trade relations would work, like how, ambassadors or diplomats would negotiate. So yes, about learning quickly, that was very valuable. And for me, like two most important things, like one regarding the process, Salimah also mentioned this earlier, but I want to hammer that again. Like, do not take the problem for granted. Most of the time we are fixated on a solution rather than understanding the problem itself. And like when we constructed that fishbone, like the strands came out, like the problem started to become clearer and clearer, and that was so valuable. And when we decided to go into an action, so that was like one very crucial element about the process itself. The next important learning that I had was about teamwork. So when we started, like we started with like with any teamwork, like we started with trying to draft a team constitution and team norms and things like that, and we missed some things in the way. And I realized then that I had always been involved with teams in which somebody was taking an initiative, somebody was taking a lead. And here, when we were like lagging behind, it needed some of our team members to step up. Like Stephanie and Mayra really stepped up to hold us accountable, and that is very important. Like I realized, like team norms are really important in teamwork as well. So those are the two learnings that I carry with me. Thanks.
Yes, I definitely agree with my teammates. So this approach is an approach for complex problems, and we were given a problem that didn't have like an obvious solution. And at first we thought this was a very big problem for us to solve. So we were disagreeing a lot on it. And yes, it was very hard for us. We felt we didn't have any advances, we were behind. But we keep on asking, and this is what the approach tells us, to keep on asking what else, to deconstruct the problems. And then we found some things that we could definitely act upon on, and we feel really good. And this was also thanks to our teamwork, what Bishal was mentioning. In the process, we also learn how to work as a team, how to communicate, and how to reach consensus. So for me, those two were also my biggest surprises from the process.
For me, it was more the feedback I got from the guests that were invited. They felt the students were prepared. What surprised me was how prepared on Mondays, on Wednesdays when we met, they came prepared, they came with questions. I've worked with groups where, they expect you to do everything. I actually did very little, but I did a lot of research in the background, and they drove this bus, and the guests that came along, even after my debrief with my guests, they felt the students were asking the right questions. They were touching on areas that Kenya needed to focus on. They were saying that things that Kenya needed to hear. Quite often when you deal with governments, they're very defensive. And for the people that we worked with, especially the cabinet minister, the permanent secretary, they felt very comfortable with the team and felt some of the questions that are being asked, they could take them back into their own teams and work through them. So that I was surprised.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for sharing. And now we'll take questions. If you have a question, please use the Zoom feature to raise your hand. Katya, would you like to ask your question, please?
Thank you, Salimah, and thank you to the team for your presentation. It was great to hear more about the work that you did this past semester. I have a couple of questions, and my first one is around some of the interviews and conversations that you had as part of this process. I think that's come up a lot, and so it seems to be a really important part of the work that you did. And I'm curious to hear how your problem kind of morphed and changed with more feedback that you got from the people that you interviewed. Do you think that the problem from when you first started versus after the interviews changed a lot? And if so, how? And then I'm also curious, what are like one or two takeaways from this whole process that you think you'll be able to use going forward in some of your work, you know, as you continue through Harvard and into professional careers as well. Thank you.
Okay, let me just start. Takeaways, PDIA is already in application. We learned it in the first, in spring 1 and in spring 2, we've already applied it in so many courses. And so the concept of positive deviation, iteration, problem deconstruction, they become part of us. And at least for me, I've applied them in other courses. So I don't know whether it will ever leave me, because it has become part of me. Now every problem has a number of layers, and you should always, you know, authorize positive deviation. Don't be boxed into something. So PDI has a whole courses in us, in me at least. I can attest to that. How the problem changed, you will not realize it has changed, because one interview, so an idea comes in, you build into something, then by the time you come and sit as a group and sift it, before you go to the next one, you realize the perspectives keep changing. So you will not realize the changes immediately, but when you are at the end of the course is when you realize the whole thing has changed. So you cannot tell it's changing, but you will only realize at the end of the journey. That's how I would answer that. Yeah. So our problem actually changed. We look at the agreement, and we throw away the agreement, then we look at the signals, then we actually fix the problem, then we break it again. And then before we knew it, you know, the whole thing had changed. So yeah, it changed, it expanded, and we even can do more and more on that. That's my take.
I would say too, I mean, how it worked is that every week we would learn something, and then the next interview guest, we would ask them about what we learned, and we would reframe what we thought the problem was, and we started to share that. That's a strategy we started maybe like in week 2.5 or week 3. We're like, let's share with our interview guests, you know, what we're thinking now, like where we're at and what we're trying to uncover. And I think that was very successful. And I agree with John. I think like the PDIA approach sort of becomes part of you. I think for me, I learned when you have questions, even when you're working with like high level government officials who are, you know, they're important people and they've achieved like, you know, status, and there's a lot of respect that I have for them, acknowledging it's still okay to ask the questions, and that, you know, you can kind of push them. They are, you know, they are politicians, and so they know how to not answer a question if they don't want to, certainly, but that it's okay to kind of push. And if you don't understand something, it probably means that others do not understand it as well. You know, and that can be for a variety of reasons, but I think I just kind of holding on to that more, like ask the questions. If there's a question, ask the question. And I would say this idea of iterating quickly, like try to learn quickly and just do something and take action. Like I said, we didn't get a chance to really take too much action besides like, you know, the deconstruction and the fishbone, et cetera, and the learning in that way. I think if we had another 12 weeks, we could probably have more to share, but just the idea of doing something small, big challenges are chipped away little bits at a time.
Yeah, to quickly add on to this, like I'll give you a small example. Like when we started, like we were thinking, like Dr. Imbenzi had said, that the not having a trade agreement between countries was a problem. And when we discussed in our team, we started to, you know, question like, why was a trade agreement necessary at all? Like who would it benefit if there wasn't trade agreement? Would it benefit the farmers that whose products we're trying to market, or like why would it matter to whom? So digging into these questions was very crucial to deconstructing the problem. So yeah, that was one. And like one of the learnings that like Stephanie also said, like focusing on things that you can achieve quickly, like establishes a kind of momentum that you can build on, and that is crucial as well. Like especially in things that are sticky like this, like and if you can start with small wins, probably you can go a lot further. So that was one thing I learned as well.
Yes, I would just add that we got very valuable insights from the interviews that we wouldn't have gotten just from reading documents or resources. We get to learn what was political feasible, for example, that is hard to know without talking to people that are inside the government or inside certain sectors. And we got like new perspectives and solutions from the problem that we had not think before. That helped us a lot. And regarding the question of how are we going to apply this in our professional lives, so I'm interested, for example, in inequality, and this is a very complex problem to solve. So I'm sure this approach will help me to navigate that area. And also I'm excited because this summer I'm doing my internship in our women's NGO that is based in Guatemala. So I'm using PDIA approach again. I'm very excited, and I already proposed this to the team in Guatemala, and they are very surprised and very happy because they've never heard before of this, and they think it's a way that they could find finally a solution for what they're looking for.
Wonderful, thank you. That brings us to the end of the hour. I wanted to thank everyone. Oh no, we have a question. Le Bogang, would you like to ask your question? Sorry, I just saw your hand.
Hi everybody, my name is Lebo, to keep it simple. I'm an undergrad from South Africa. First of all, I just wanted to say congratulations to the team. I mean, I myself am very passionate about these sorts of issues, and I was blown away because I could see there was a lot of work that was put into this entire endeavor, something that I'm curious about. I'm not looking for, clear answers and facts, just perspectives from people who've been engaged in the material. Is since the focus is a trade agreement between two states, and Kenya is an emerging market, it's a developing country. I just wanted to find out, from your perspective, how much do you think of a factor the industrial development of Kenya was in the lack of, a trade agreement between the two states, as well as Kenya's competitiveness in the import and export markets, just from what you have seen and how you've engaged. And then secondly, do you think development-driven initiatives aimed at industrial development would have helped this particular problem, especially when it comes to boosting the import-export competitiveness of Kenya? Because at the end of the day, it's an economics issue. There's a lot of competition. There's a lot of push and pull. So it helps to develop a state's capacity and productivity so that it's competitive in the global import-export markets. So I just wanted from the things that you've seen and what you've heard, do you think this may have helped if we also included some industrial development focused approaches? Thank you.
Okay, talking of industrial approach and industrial development and how it affected the trade, that is just another problem, and there's a problem to it, because industrial development requires underlying support system like the power system, like the investors, how do they come and invest to enhance the industrialization. But for sure, one of the signals we mentioned earlier on was the trade in non-complex commodities. And that is already an indication that the economy has not developed a level where complexity, if you have read the Atlas of Economic Complexity, maturity of a country, an economy of a country is measured to have been matured by the complexity of the commodities that it exports or imports. So one of the things that we realized that the trade was very basic, agricultural produce and textile. But when we dug into it again, we realized that under it is that Canadian government is not very much comfortable with Kenya exporting finished goods, which means, you know, industrialization will have to be enhanced, because when you add value, you do value addition, then you export it, then the produce will actually enhance further industrial development. But the moment it is not even allowed at the initial stage, it kills the process itself. So we didn't want to focus on that, because that actually requires political engagement and developing some sort of carrot, so that you make it attractive for the Canadian government to accept Kenyan, you know, processed goods. And that is something Kenya will have to sit back and look at the processes involved, the political leverages and diplomatic tools that you can use to bring Canada into a process where they can accept that, you know, finished goods can be actually exported from Kenya. So we actually focus on the trade, but then if we had to go back and to solve it and to work with Dr. Imbenzi for another 1 year, then we will look actually at diplomatic leverages that can be pulled, so that Canada is a bit relaxed and be able to accept certain things from Kenya. And then from there, now you can actually ask people to come and invest in industrial industries, so that when you process goods, they will have a wider market outside. So it's just the PDIA thing again, a problem after another problem, and layers and layers. Yeah. So industrial development is very important, but it's just a symptom of so many other things.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John.
I do agree with John, just in a quick comment on that, where the Kenyan government has started working on that aspect. We did not touch it or go in depth into it, but the Cabinet Secretary for Treasury, and I'm just gonna put this book up, they've just launched what he calls the Summary of Kenya Investment Opportunities in Kenya, Key Investment Opportunities in Kenya. And it touches things on different sectors, energy and all that Canada is used to. So it's a comprehensive package that the government has put together. And for me, what was surprising about this document, it falls so much in line with what the team was asking me through our 7 weeks. And so it's exciting to see the government starting to come and say, okay, you know, we need to showcase what is available in Kenya. Because why should Canadian business invest in Kenya? Well, they know nothing about Kenya. But now Treasury is starting to say, you know, we have something we can offer. We have industries we can offer, but that's the next phase. And I'm really hoping Salimah's team will look at us again in a new way and say, okay, how can we help push this forward? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Once again, thank you very much to all of the participants who've attended this event. Thank you very much to Dr. Imbenzi for all the support that you've provided our team, and to all of our students who have really done a lot of hard work and have learned so much. And it's incredible to see, one, how much you did in the virtual environment, right? I feel like you almost feel like you've been to Nairobi, and hopefully one day you can all go to Kenya and see the country that you are actually working on. But thank you very much. Our next event, we've been having these every Tuesday, but the next 2 Tuesdays we will not be having any event because of the Harvard graduation, etc. So our next event will be Tuesday, June 8th at noon Eastern, and the topic will be understanding abandoned projects in Nigeria. With that, thank you very much for attending. Have a wonderful rest of the day, and thank you.